Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's IMC webinar. I'm Hélène, and it's my pleasure to be your host. At IMC, the International Mentoring Center, we are dedicated to creating transformative experiences for professionals worldwide through mentoring, leadership development, and community building. We believe in the power of a connection, authentic stories, and practical strategies to inspire both personal and professional growth. Today, we are thrilled to welcome Jason Johnson. Jason is a mentor, leader, and strategist with over 25 years of experience in leadership, team development, and organizational strategy across the US. He is also a working genius facilitator, creative collaborator, and advocate for engagement growth and innovation. Jason's approach focuses on creating psychologically safe environments where mentees can explore their potential, receive constructive feedback, and develop their strengths. His work has earned national recognition for delivering exceptional results while nurturing growth in individuals and teams. In today's session, Mentoring for Growth, Heart-Centered Leadership, Jason will share his philosophy of leading with heart, guiding growth, and inspiring potential. And now let's dive in here from Jason. Jason, the stage.
Hello. Hi, Helene. Thank you so much for having me. It's such an honor to be here with you and the International Mentor Group. Really appreciate it. So I'd like to share my screen and then we'll get started. So great. Guiding growth and inspiring potential. I've been mentoring people for many years, at least a couple of decades, or maybe even three. I chose this image, be the lighthouse, because I think it's important to understand that leadership is not about going out and heart-centered leadership is more about being grounded, right? It's about being grounded in who you are and connected with yourself, and people will see your light and follow. And so the lighthouse is a good representation of that. Go ahead and get over to the next slide. So thank you for the introduction, Helene. One of the things that I think is very important in today's world is that business success is going to be dependent on leaders learning to engage the hearts and minds of people. And what that means is that the society, the workforce, culture, the world has changed, and traditional command and control leadership may have worked very well 10 years ago or 15 years ago, but it doesn't work today. And people are looking for balance in their life. People are not looking at work and life being separate, but as one. And so learning to engage the hearts and minds of people is approaching leadership from a place of curiosity. And that's part of the heart-centered leadership model. It's this continuous learning journey. And so I want to talk about my journey. And I think most journeys are from pain to passion, at least mine is. And when I was born in Germany, I'm 50 years old, and in the first 7 years of my life, I moved 5 times from Germany to the States, and then to another state, and then to another state, and then within the state. So in the first 7 years, I moved 5 times. And I think it was Aristotle that said, give me a child for 7 years and I will show you the man he will become. And a lot of psychologists will agree that most of what we experience in our life in the first 7 years kind of defines who we are. And I can tell you that I'm very comfortable with change. I don't hold on to things. I keep moving forward. And I really have become very proficient in learning how to pack a moving truck. So that was just the first 7 years of my life. I mentioned I'm 50, and the home I'm in today, I bought with my wife when I was 41 years old, and this is the 26th home I've lived in the in 41 years. So you do the math. I've moved around a lot, and because I've moved around a lot, I constantly felt disconnected. I constantly felt like I didn't belong in the early years of my life, and that was my pain, part of my pain. Um, into my adolescence, I was very curious about the universe, still am. I had a telescope, and I was also very curious about cellular structure, like how the things that we're made of. And I always thought it was fascinating that um, cells work together to create systems, and that's very much nature, right? So nature is within us. And so I used to think a lot about, and I still do, what's out there beyond in the world. So I've always kept had a curious mindset. Um, when I was younger, in my adolescent years, I loved playing soccer. I think you call it football, but across the pond. And I ran track, and I learned about teamwork. I learned about commitment, dedication, staying focused, practicing. We've all heard the term practice makes perfect. Um, and I was having a conversation with a leadership group not too long ago, and the subject of practice makes perfect came up. And somebody on the call said, Jason, practice doesn't make perfect. Practice makes permanent. The real question is what are we practicing? Because what we practice every day becomes what we do. And so when we think about leadership and heart-centered leadership, command and control versus coming from a place of being grounded and what heart-centered leadership means. Um, and when I was 13 in the eighth grade, I had just started junior high, or I was in junior high. I was in a new school, um, and I had a science teacher who mentored me. And one day he said to me, he said, Jason, you should run for class president. And I laughed because I didn't know anybody. I wasn't popular. Um, and I felt kind of lonely. And I chuckled and I said, well, why would you say that? He says, I sit here and I see all the students and what you do and the things that you say and how you carry yourself, people emulate, right? They do those things, they practice those things. And so I didn't really understand the concept of leadership, but I ran for class president because I had a mentor that kind of nudged me along and guided me, and I won. And I fell in love with being in that role, and learning about business and learning about teamwork again. It was very cool experience. And so all throughout high school, I was involved in sports, in the National Honor Society. Academics were very good. Um, Class president, student government, all those things. Pep club, we'd go to the cheer the teams on. And then my senior year, I was student body president my senior year, and I won awards and scholarships. And but also in that time, when I was 12, my parents got divorced. And so this was another one of my pain points in life. It was very, very pivotal for me. My father, I idolized him. He had the mind of an engineer. And when I was a kid, he would always tell me, it's mind over matter, Jason. If you don't mind, it doesn't matter. And I really didn't know what that meant until I was an adult. And it's how we carry our thoughts and our perspectives that when we give something weight and we think about things and they weigh on us, um, then it will weigh us down. And so perspective is a big part of leadership and certainly heart-centered leadership. And so when my parents got divorced, I was crushed because my father was also a mentor of mine. I idolized him, and so I was crushed. And I think that when I got into junior high and high school, I was involved in so many things because I felt like I needed to prove myself and show that I had worth and value. And some days teachers would say to me, "Oh, here comes the guy that thinks he could do anything." because I was constantly trying to overachieve. I didn't realize that I just needed to be myself. Um, so that was my experience in junior high, high school. Um, and I went on to start college the day before I graduated from high school. I went to the local college, university, community college, first summer session, second summer session, and then went to university at University of Arizona in Tucson. And so I'd never stopped trying to overachieve. And I was sitting in my accounting class, my accounting 200 class, my freshman year of college, my first year of college, and I had this overwhelming feeling from my heart, from my gut, from my heart that just said, "You're not where you're supposed to be." So that day, I dropped out of college. I left, and people were shocked. There were people that judged me. There were people saying things, and I didn't care. I didn't give that value, and I wanted to go out and experience the world. So I um, I dropped out of college and I started tinkering with film. I was an extra in a made-for-TV movie. I piloted a kids show, and I would do my own film, independent film work. Back then, we had these VHS cameras that were, heavy, but we would make my friends and I would make films and shoot footage. And I was just always fascinated with um, people and what makes people tick. And again, from that place of being curious, I was an artist. I learned how to paint and sculpt stone. I worked at a rock shop with crystals and fossils and minerals, and I became very fascinated with metaphysics. Again, this thing about the universe and being connected and grounded and our cellular structure and how things worked. So I was always very fascinated in that. And then but I wasn't really going anywhere. I was just kind of this learner of life. And a very dear friend of mine who is like a brother to me, he just said, "What are you doing? What are you doing with your life?" He says, "Come, I've got a job for you." So I um, went to work for a large company at the ground level, a global food service company who's headquartered in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, in the US. And I drove a coffee truck, and we had branches all over the country, 80 different locations, very large company. And I drove a coffee truck to different offices. And I really wasn't, my job was to sell coffee and stock break rooms and visit clients and provide them a service on a reoccurring schedule. And I wasn't really focused on the selling because when I came aboard with this company, person that I replaced had been there for 20 years. His name was Joe. And I heard from all my customers when I was working, they would say, "Oh, Joe doesn't do it like this. Joe did it this way." Or Joe came on Tuesday, or you have big shoes to fill. So I was trying to win them over and build relationships with them and really understand what their needs were. And I was always focused on them and what was important to them, what was frustrating to them. And I wanted to make sure that when I left their place and I went on to my next stop, I wanted to make sure that when I left, that they were satisfied and they were happy with the experience they got from me stocking their break room and the interaction. It was always very, very important. And because I wasn't focused on sales, my manager came to me one day and she says, "Jason, your sales are low. You've been on the job for 4 months now. You need to sell stuff. We're a corporation, we're a company. Our job is to make money and take care of our shareholders." And I said to her, I said, my customers just need love. I'm building relationships. And this was 25 years ago, 26 years ago. She didn't even know what to say. That was the end of the conversation. And that same manager came to me about 4 months later, and she hands me an American Express gift card that was worth 2,000 US dollars. And she said, "Jason, you won the contest." And I said, "What contest?" And she looked at me very strange and she said, "What do you mean, what contest?" the national sales contest for route drivers. And I said, I didn't know there was a contest. And she goes, really? You didn't know there was a contest? I said, no. And she goes, hmm. She's like, well, you won. And I said, you remember 4 months ago when I told you my customers just need love? And we smiled because it finally clicked that when you provide, and this is in business, right? And it wasn't from a place, I wasn't manipulating my customers. I genuinely cared about the experience that they got, and they could feel that from me. And therefore, they just bought stuff from me and they continue to buy things from me. And that that led to awards, that led to recognition. I got this national sales contest. I was the number one route salesperson in the country. Um, it was recognition, and then from a corporate metric standpoint, I had great client retention. My sales were good. My profit was good. So I was hitting on all the marks, and I was celebrated. Um, that led to 3 promotions in 3 years. And then one day, our HR person came to me and said, would you like to run your own branch? And I said, sure. So I was in Arizona at the time. They moved, and then I got married and had a son. And they moved my wife and son and I to Utah, and I got a new team. And I didn't know my team. So I spent the first months really just getting to know my team and asking them questions and finding out who they are. Do they have families? What do they like to do? And and then once we got past getting to know them on a human level, I would ask them questions like, what are your challenges in your job? And I always like to ask people, if you had this one thing that could make your day better, what would it be? And then I would try to solve that problem, right? Try to provide that for them. And when I could help remove their obstacles, then their day was better. And I didn't know it at the time because I was still a very young general manager in my mid 20s. Um, that created a bond and it created connection, and it created leadership, right? And followers. And true leadership is not people follow you because of your title, but because of who you are, what you stand for, and how they feel about you, right? And so my team and I became very tight. We were connected. When I would have problems from clients or from above leadership in the corporation, I would meet with my team and say, how do we solve this? And then I would just listen because they're closer to the problem than I am. And so I wanted their opinions, right? Like I was a new general manager and my employees had been in their roles for 5 years, 10 years, 12 years, 15 years, 8 years, right? So they had been doing their job longer than I had been doing my job. And so I saw that they were more skilled. And so I wanted to ask them what they thought, how we could solve this problem. And by working together and just creating this team environment and being respectful with them and curious with them, and it really created this kind of happy, loving culture. And by the way, again, we rose as a team. We rose to the top 10% in the country. Again, I received awards year after year, being in that top 10%, which led to another promotion. And so I moved to a different city and had some different challenges. But again, just seeing people as human beings, we had some successes. Then I moved to another city and did it all over again. And I started to think, right? So I did this 3 times, being recognized nationally. Um, and so my CEO had come into town. I was in Dallas, Texas now at my third time around here, my third team, and the CEO came in and he said, Jason, we do these employee engagement score surveys every year. And he said, Jason, your scores are the highest in the country. Um, he says, I've never seen scores this high. And I'll give you an example. There's a question that says, for employees, do you feel like you're part of a team? And my score was 96.8%. And he's telling me this that like that's phenomenal that 96.8% of your people feel like they're part of a team. And that's not how I felt. I felt who's the one or two people on my team that don't feel like they're part of the team, right? Like I was concerned. Um, but he just said, what do you attribute this to? And this was a conversation we had probably 4 or 5 years ago. And I said heart-centered leadership, and he didn't really know what to do with that as a CEO, because it's all about metrics and things that are tangible and data, and there's not a lot of data around heart-centered leadership, right? It's a feeling, it's a culture, and so uh, I started to lean into this. 2020 came and the world shut down. I started a podcast. I was still going to work every day, but we weren't very busy, because a lot of businesses were closed, and our jobs are to go inside businesses and stock their coffee and their tea and paper plates, but nobody was in the workplace. So we weren't, very few people were in the workplace. And so I started looking and thinking about and reflecting on all the things, hindsight is a gift, right? And so I was looking back at my different teams and why did we thrive? Why did we have the best engagement scores? Why did our team become number one in the country, or top 10% most of the time? But we were number one in the country as a team at one point. And I really started to think about emotions and thoughts and aligning the heart and the mind. And that came to me because I was watching Netflix one day and changing the channels. And I thought, oh, if I put my TV on ESPN, there's no way I'm going to be able to receive Netflix. So my receiver in my TV has to be on the same channel, the same frequency as the satellite in the sky that's broadcasting Netflix, right? And so in order for the communication come through, in order for me to be able to see the big picture, to know what Netflix is trying to tell me, I've got to be on the same channel, the same frequency. I've got to be connected, right? And so I think about that between humans and teamwork, and it's all the same. If there's no vision or end goal and people are doing their own things and staying busy, it's going to be this organized chaos or conglomeration messiness. And so you've got to keep, bring your team together regularly, restate the vision, come up, find the missing pieces to the puzzle, right? And this was all again influenced, from I started to think about those things that I would think about as a child, right? The sun and plants and seeds and water and the universe and science and uh, cellular structure, that cells work together to create molecules, and molecules work together to create proteins, and proteins work together to make organs, and organs link up with other organs and make systems in our body. And so the human body is just an amazing creation. And so if you think about that, I like to think about that, as corporations, right? And individual peoples or cells and teams within the building, and then the building, and then the maybe different departments, and then the larger piece of the puzzle, the corporation. And so working together in this kind of flow of synchronicity, is very important. And which leads me to where I am today. My boss, so my job is director of people and culture, and I created this role for myself about 3.5 years ago. And because I had proven all these metrics and these skills, that they said, what do you want to do? And I said, I want to help managers be better leaders. I want to mentor people. And they said, okay, great. And so we created a role. And so I support managers in the Southwest US, with leadership development, team building, personal growth. I do speak. Helene had mentioned that I was a certified Working Genius facilitator. I don't know if you're familiar with Working Genius. If you'd love to have a discussion, we can, but it's a teamwork productivity model that was built by Patrick Lencioni and his company, the Table Group. Patrick Lencioni is a a very well-known author that has been speaking about team building, organizational health, leadership for about 3 decades. So he knows exactly what he's talking about, but it's a personality assessment, and it kind of shows how people work together and what gives you energy and what drains your energy. And so I also spend my time on impact, right? So what happens in the workplace, people take home, and what happens at home, people bring to the workplace. So uh, I'll tell you, uh, I had when I was running an operation, I was a general manager. I had a driver that would always come in late. And kind of the rule of thumb was that our drivers were off the dock and in their trucks and en route to their first customer by 7 a.m. And I had a driver that would come in at 7:30, and he would get his coffee and he would talk to a few people. He'd load his truck, and sometimes it was 8:30 before he even left the building. And I had other managers coming to me complaining that he was setting a bad example. Like, drivers need to be off the dock by 7 a.m. And by the way, this driver, and we'll say his name is Thomas. Um, Thomas was phenomenal. Thomas he saw all of his customers every single day. His sales were the second best out of the team. His retention rates were phenomenal. I never got any complaints from his customers. He was growing his business. He was seeing all of his stops, doing all the right things. But I went to Thomas and I asked him, "Why do you come in at 7:30?" And he says, "Well, Jason," he shared something personal with me. This is my daughter is in a rehab facility, and my wife and I are raising our granddaughter, and I can't take her to the daycare until 7, and that's why I'm here at 7:30. And I was like, okay, thank you for letting me know. Thank you for sharing that with me. And then I said, you're doing a great job. I was just curious why you got here at 7:30. Well, I went back to the other managers and I said, look, I said, our corporate office measures us on retention, productivity, sales, gross profit. I said, Thomas is one of the best at all those. We don't get measured on what time people leave and start their day. And so that was me understanding what goes on in somebody's life outside of work. And by being compassionate with them, they were able to show up better at work, right? It's this ripple effect. And the same goes for at work. If you treat somebody poorly at work, they take that home to their spouse, their kids. Um, that happened to me. I was so consumed by work in my career as I was growing. I felt like I was under a lot of pressure. I had demands that required me to work late hours. I started to neglect my wife and I started to neglect my children. And I almost got divorced. I'm happy to say that my wife and I have been married for 23 years. But there was a time in my life where all this pressure and structure of command and control um, was eating at me, and I was taking that home to my kids. And that was probably 15 years ago. And I realized that we have the power to change that for people. We have the power to treat them well and still get success done, right? Business and people can thrive together. And so that's when I kind of started to speak and talk and lead, and the results were all there. And so inspiring others and the ripple effect, working genius, heart-centered leadership. I put all these, the universe, I put all these things together, and that's how I show up every day, grounded. Um, and so I'm going to pause there, Helene, if that's okay,
Yes, that's
and
fine.
see if there's any questions from the audience.
Yes, we have a question from Toyin saying, considering the fact that Heart Center mentoring is present and authentic, how does the mentor guard against the mentor becoming too self-focused, turning the process inward instead of outward?
Yeah, I think if I understand the question, how do you turn the process outward instead of inward of heart-centered leadership? Is that the question? Yeah. You just have to have my shirt today says courage, and
Mm.
I'm going to talk about heart-centered leadership in a minute. And you have to have the courage to do the right thing. And of course, it took me a long time to have the courage to speak out. But here's the thing: you can't change people. The only thing you have control over is what you say and what you do. And so you can't change things outside of you, only what's inside of you. And when you start to change the way you behave, right? We've all heard the phrase, you can't love somebody until you learn how to love yourself. That's so true. You can't lead others until you learn how to lead yourself. And so it was a great question. Thank you so much. And thank you, Menzer, I believe, Monzer. I'm sorry if I've mispronounced that. Thank you for recognizing my story. Um, looks like that's all the questions, unless there's any others.
Now
I'll continue with the presentation.
we
Yeah.
have a comment from Abdeladem saying, what consistent practices would you recommend to develop servant leadership within a large organization, especially to create and lead a strong customer-centric culture? I'm curious about the practical steps we can take to make a clear impact.
Yeah, that's a great question. I look, I'm a continuous learner. I'm learning all the time. And so when COVID shut the world down, it gave me the opportunity to really invest in myself. And so I would recommend that for anything. Um, invest in yourself. Um, the content that you feed yourself, you become, right? We've all heard that, uh, if you want to know who you are, look at your circle of friends. Um, you know, I started reading. I can recommend a ton of books. There's a book called The Culture Code by Daniel Coyle that is phenomenal. Any one of Patrick Lencioni's books. Um, Bob Berg does a book. In fact, we are The Go Giver. I'm taking a group of people through a workshop that's a long course, I guess. We're journeying around The Go Giver by Bob Berg. So just start reading, start being curious. Those are practical steps that you can do is to work on yourself. And then when you show up at work, it's about having awareness, willingness, and taking action. And so that's part of the process.
Thank you. We also have a question from Giusna. I hope I'm not butchering your name. I have a question. A lot of discussions are going around in today's ages regarding humanity in leadership. We have access to information and statistics and studies that never before. Then why is it that we don't see much change? People still leave that job because of poor leadership and lack of empathy and humanity at workplace.
Yeah, the world is a little crazy right now, um, especially in the United States. Uh, and there's a lot going on. And I'll tell you, I stopped watching the news, and I found that my life improved. And when you're constantly, again, this is the content that we get, right? If we're constantly being inundated by negative, 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 then it takes it takes a toll on your internal system. It takes a toll on your heart. It takes a toll on your mind. And if we can align our mind and our heart, um, and it's not that those things aren't important. I'm not burying my head in the sand, so to speak. I get to choose the content when I want to see it. I just stopped having the news on in my house all the time. I can certainly, pull up any news source and kind of look to see what's going on in the world. But always, I don't think that, being defensive is not healthy. Certainly going from a stance of being curious, right? So I'll tell you, when I was a child and I moved around a lot, my parents got divorced, I was bullied a lot. And my mom told me at a very young age that when somebody's bullying you, it has nothing to do with you. It's where they're coming from. And I remember this very specific time. This kid was a foot taller than me, probably 80 pounds heavier than me, and he was bullying me and picking on me and trying to fight me within a group of people. And in that moment, I heard my mom's voice and I started to have empathy for that person, right? What is so wrong in this individual's life that they have to show up this way and pick on somebody who's smaller than them, probably weaker than them, just to make themselves feel better? And so I started, instead of being fearful or angry, I started to have empathy, and it really shifted the whole dynamic. And so I just, there's going to be a lot of noise in the world. And listening is, people say communication is probably one of the biggest issues in the world, whether it's personal or professional, lack of communication. And which is true. I believe that to be true. And if we think about the communication, a big part of communication is listening. Two ears, one mouth. And so when we can listen more to understand, then the communication gets better, because then we start to be curious about, well, what do they mean by that? And then you ask, hey, can you tell me more? Elaborate a little bit. I'm interested in what you just said, and I want to make sure I understand you, right? So often we just get a piece of the information, then we make assumptions, and we tell ourselves these stories. And so I think that is what kind of helps with, you said in your question, poor leadership and the lack of empathy and humanity in the workplace. Listen more and be curious to understand. And we can't change people. We can only, start that with ourselves. And then what happens is somebody goes, oh my gosh, this person has empathy. I'm going to try that because I want to be like this person. Like, they created a nice, safe space. It was psychologically safe. And that's the kind of person I want to be. Thank you. Great question.
Thank you, Jason. We
All
also
right.
have
Yeah.
we also have a question from Toying. She's saying empathy and connection are key for heart center mentoring, but how does a heart center mentor avoid oversharing?
Yeah, that's great. There is a balance. You have to, and again, um, being a heart-centered leader is having compassion. It's not being a therapist. I always tell leaders that, let me talk about this slide because I think I'm going to address your question in this slide. Um, Courage, right? You have to have the courage to say something or do something that's different, challenge the status quo, not in an aggressive way, but from a place of care, right? And then curiosity, I talked a little bit about that, being coming from a place of wanting to understand, wanting to discover, so that you do understand. And I talked about connection, right? You've got to have a signal. You got to be connected with somebody and be present with them, that it's one initiative after another, and we don't hear, we don't see, we don't feel what's going on, and those things are critical. We've all heard the phrase, you have to, if slow down to go fast, right? I think most people have heard that phrase, because when you go fast, and you skip things or things get missed or the communication is broken, then it actually compounds and makes more issues. But if you slow down, you actually go faster because you have less issues. And then collaboration, as a leader, even though I am the boss of my team, I'm their partner. And so when issues arrive or things need to be solved, I think it was Steve Jobs that said, you don't hire smart people to tell them what to do, right? You hire people to put them in a place that are closer to the issues to solve, closer to the problems, and then they can come back to you and make suggestions, and then together you collaborate on what to do. And then compassion is um, empathy in action. So empathy is just knowing that somebody's going through something. Compassion is saying, "Are you okay?" And this is where I wanted to address the question. Um, I'm always telling leaders in business that it is not your job to be a therapist, but it is your job to care about them as a human being, and it is your job to direct them in business related stuff. And if you see that somebody has issues, getting curious, if people want to share, then they can share. And if it is personal related, most large companies have an EAP, an employee assistance program, where they can get guidance counseling. Or if you don't have that in place, just suggest to them that to find a group of individuals that can help them seek therapy. I mean, I've had therapy. Therapy is great. Seek a mentor, right? Partner them up with somebody that maybe is doing similar roles, and then you kind of create this mentorship. But leaders are not therapists. We don't have the training or the documents that say we know what we're talking about. Um, but I know what I'm talking about when it comes to this human connection. I don't have a degree, but I can tell you that I've got 30 years under my belt of constantly going through these motions. And so I hope I answered your question. Um, but at the end of the day, heart center leadership is really about seeing people as human beings.
Yes.
Okay, I'll go on to the next slide.
Yes.
Yes, so heart center leadership in action. Yeah, we're a little long on time.
It's okay.
So
We have a final question from an anonymous attendee. Maybe we can cover that now and then we can move on.
okay, okay.
How do you deal with silent unwillingness when leading a change or a continuous improvement project?
How do I deal with silence and willingness
Yes.
when dealing with continuous
When
change?
leading a change or a continuous improvement project.
Yeah, I think being curious to find out. Sometimes what I'll do is if I'm in a group of people, I'll state the vision of what the project is about, right? And vision is always important, because everybody has to be focused on the same thing. And then I'll go around and ask people what their ideas are because I want engagement. And regardless if I agree or disagree, that's not the time to have that conversation. And even if you don't agree, you can just acknowledge and say, "Oh, interesting," or "Tell me more." Or if you disagree, that's a signal for you to ask another question. What do you see that looking like, or what are your ideas or your thoughts? Because when you start to do that and ask for questions and learn how to listen, then that's when people become more engaged. But if you're just talking all the time and your team shows up and they're all silent and you tell them what you're doing, tell them what the plan is, they leave, there was no engagement. And so engagement is very key to building that environment that is going to create an area that grows, right? Collaboration and teamwork.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for the great question. So again, lead yourself, people will follow, care for the environment and the framework, right? Sometimes the framework is outdated. I always like to say you can't put a bunch of batteries inside a gas. You have to rewire it. You have to change the framework, right? You have to do a lot of things. It's not just battery power or the absence of gasoline. Again, create a shared vision um, as a team. Accept that people will disagree with you, right? You can't change them. I talked about this. Once you recognize that, things get to be better. And to talk about this kind of social change, if you've heard of the law of diffusion of innovation, um, in 1962, Everett Rogers wrote about the law of diffusion of innovation, and it was about social change and society, and that every everything goes through these phases, right? So 2.5% of the population are the inventors. Those are the people that are willing to take risks, right? Those are the people that have courage. And then the early adopters, they see those people and they believe what you believe. Early adopters, they're aware of it. They see the need for change. They just don't know how to take the first step. And so they're believers. And then you have the early majority of the population, which is about 34% of the population. They are pragmatic. They're rational. They're realistic. They have to see something working before they'll buy in, right? And then the late majority, which is about 34% of the population, um, they're very conservative. They're set in their values. Um, Even though something is working, this is how I do it. This is how we do it as a team. Um, yes, Crossing the Chasm. I see that in the chat. I'm going to get to that. It's a great book, right? And then the laggards is the last 16%. These are the people that uh, do not like change whatsoever. They're very skeptical. In fact, the only reason they got a smartphone is because their flip phone wouldn't text very well with their family members, right? Like they didn't want a smartphone, they just had to get one. And so Jeffrey Moore in 1991 wrote a book called Crossing the Chasm, right? And that's a lot of social change fails when the early adopters um, fail to meet people where they are, right? So I love that it's a chasm because you have to build a bridge to what's important to other people. And then um, Malcolm Gladwell in 2000 wrote a book called The Tipping Point, that this is when social change actually happens. And so when I first started talking about heart-centered leadership, nobody listened. Nobody wanted to hear what I had to say. They just wanted me to go do my job. Whatever, Jason, just go do your job. And it wasn't until I started to think about what's important to them, right? And so as a leader of social change, you have to understand who you're talking to and understanding what's important to them. And then you build a bridge to not to them, but from them to you. So it's like, how do you solve a lot of problems? You reverse engineer it, right? You start with the problem and you work your way back to where you're at. That's the same thing with the crossing the chasm and then the tipping point. Once you've been able to do that and the early majority start to buy in, because now you're talking about the things that are important to them, then the conservative values start to go as well, right? And so that's one of the things, we're people that disagree with us, the laggards at the other end of the spectrum. If you focus all your energy trying to change their mind, you're missing out on a huge piece of the population that is just waiting for you to talk to them. And so the law of diffusion of innovation is really about connecting with the people that are right there on the edge of hearing your message and building a bridge from them to you. But great books, uh, Crossing the Chasm and The Tipping Point. And then Simon Sinek, I learned about those three people through Simon Sinek. I again in 2020, I was doing a lot of self-discovery, a lot of learning, and I came across his TED Talk that he did in 2009, Great Leaders Inspire Action. And to this day, that TED Talk is still one of the, I think, top 5 most played TED Talks to this day. But he talks about start with, in fact, he wrote several books, but the 3 books that I've read that I would highly recommend to anybody is Start with Why, Leaders Eat Last, and The Infinite Game. He talks about leadership and he talks about social change, and that social change happens because of why people believe, right? So when you start with why, like Dr. Martin Luther King, he in the 1960s, he went to Washington, D.C., and he was at the mall in Washington, and there were a 250,000 people showed up. They didn't have email invites. There was no social media posting. There wasn't a way to spread the word except for by mouth. And it's because people didn't show up to see Dr. King. They showed up because they believed what he believed. They showed up for themselves. Right? He didn't say, he said, I have a dream. He didn't say, I have a 10-point plan that's going to move us forward. Right? He spoke from his heart. And that's what causes social change. You talk about why you want to do it. A lot of great companies, and Simon Sinek talks about this in his books and publicly. A lot of great companies that are successful talk about why they do things. It's like Nike. Nike is doing very well. They don't um, they don't talk about their shoe. They talk about getting up early and going for a run. They talk about sweating it out. They talk about putting in the work. And so you start with why and then how and then what. Most people talk about what they do and then how they do it, and sometimes never even get to why they do it. And so social change happens when you start with why. So what's my why? A kinder world, because I believe that people and business can succeed together. And so I use this logo a lot. Heart-centered leadership. Think, your brain has neurons, or your heart has neurons that communicate with your brain. If you can align your thoughts and feelings and actions in the moment, then you get good success. And it's, you have to practice it every day. Like this is something I strive for every day. I'm not always good at it, but it's something that I strive for. And so I think we did a lot of Q&A, but if there are any other questions, I'd love to open it up now.
Yes,
Thank you.
thank you so much for your great presentation, Jason. It was amazing. I think we still have a question from Abdeladem, saying, what are the biggest challenges organizations face when implementing or developing heart center leadership, and how can they be overcome to ensure customer-centric focus?
Yeah, one of the things for me is, there's a lot of, um, kids grow into adults. I mentioned being bullied as a child. There's bullies at work, adults, and I get teased at work. Like people have fun with me, whether they're joking around or not. But some people go, "Oh, it's the director of hugs. It's the kindness guy," right? So they tease me, but at the end of the day, I don't give them energy, right? Um, I, I'll be respectful because I don't want to be disrespectful. Um, but um, the path that I've chosen gives results, and it does take time. And I think just if you're looking for a place to start, be curious. Be curious to learn and understand.
Thank you. Thank you, Jason. I also have a question for you, actually. What are
Yeah.
the most common challenges leaders face when trying to lead in a heart center way, and how can they overcome them?
Yeah, it's different. Um, People are set in their structures, and I talked a little bit about the framework. You have to be willing to change the framework of how we work. Um, the Six Types of Working Genius is a really good book by Patrick Lencioni. If somebody wanted to understand, you can take an assessment. I got certified as a facilitator. Um, you have to be willing to change the way you work, and maybe that's meetings, right? Maybe it's um, you get very specific. Maybe you have meetings on specific days. Maybe you schedule time for collaboration. So structuring the way you function throughout your day, because people don't like change. And I mentioned, one of my biggest challenges is understanding that people don't like change because of my upbringing. And I changed so much in my life. I don't hold on to a lot of things. And I that's something that comes natural to me. And so I step into the unknown relatively easy. People don't like change. And so you have to be very sensitive to that. And that's about meeting them where they're at. and then building a bridge from them to you, what's important to them, and understanding that when we can remove those frustrations or help them remove their own frustrations, then the connection isn't so staticky anymore.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dejan. I'm just checking if we don't have any more questions from the audience. Just if you can share a copy of the slides if you are comfortable doing that after the session. We can talk about it. That's totally up to you. I think we are ready to wrap up now. Thank you so much, Dejan, for sharing your wisdom and authenticity and passion with us today. Today's session offered valuable insights into heart center mentoring and leadership, reminding us that fostering trust, empathy, and connection can drive both personal and professional growth. Your strategies for creating psychologically safe spaces, mentoring with intention, and leading with heart provide practical tools that anyone can apply. To everyone who joined, thank you for participating. As a reminder, this session was recorded and will be shared by email. You can also rewatch it on our International Mentoring Center YouTube channel. For information on future events and programs, you can visit mentoringcenter.org. And I'm wishing you all the best in your mentoring and leadership journeys. Take care and see you soon at the next session. Thank you very much.